Welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're traveling back in time a bit to the Philippines in 1963. Imagine you're Rosendo Chaves, and you've got your trusty typewriter. And of course, it breaks down. So you do what anyone would do. You take it to a repairman, Fructuoso Gonzales, hoping to get it back in working order. But Chaves had no idea that this simple repair would turn into a legal battle. That would eventually go all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's what we're looking at today, the case of Chaves versus Gonzales.
It does sound like a pretty ordinary situation.
Right.
And I think that's what makes this case so interesting. It shows how contract law, which can seem really complicated and something that only applies to big businesses, can actually be important to all of us in our everyday lives.
Absolutely. So let's break this case down. So Chaves takes his typewriter over to Gonzales just for a routine cleaning and servicing. Sounds pretty simple. What happened next?
Well, time passed, and the typewriter was never fixed. Even though Chaves sent reminders to Gonzales about the repair, nothing seemed to be happening. And eventually, Gonzales said that he needed 6 pesos for parts. And Chaves, wanting to get his typewriter back, he paid the money.
So there's already a little tension building here, right? Chaves is waiting, Gonzales is delaying, and now money is involved. This whole thing is getting complicated.
Yeah, and that payment for the parts actually becomes a key part of the case later on. It helps to show that the agreement between Chaves and Gonzales wasn't just like a casual favor. It shows there was an expectation of service for payment.
That makes sense. So what happened next? Did Chaves finally get his typewriter back after he paid the money?
Well, not quite today. Months went by, and still no typewriter. Chaves was understandably frustrated at this point. So he went to Gonzales' house and demanded his typewriter back. Gonzales gave him a wrapped package. And you can imagine Chaves, relieved and excited. He rushes home, can't wait to finally have his typewriter back and working.
Yeah, I can only imagine how excited he must have been. After all this waiting, he was probably ready to get back to typing. So what happened when he unwrapped the package?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. Chaves unwraps the package, and he finds his typewriter in pieces. Parts are missing, screws are missing, even the interior cover is gone. You can just imagine his disappointment, finding his typewriter in even worse condition than when he first gave it to Gonzales.
Oh, I'd be furious. It sounds like this Gonzales guy was a total mess. So did Chaves just give up, or did he try to fix the situation?
Chaves was not going to back down. He immediately sent a formal letter to Gonzales demanding the missing parts, and he also wanted his 6 pesos back. Now, this was a smart move on Cho's part because it was an attempt to resolve this disagreement informally. He was documenting everything, trying to get a solution.
So he was getting ready for a potential legal case, just in case things didn't work out. Did Gonzales respond to the letter?
He did further. Gonzales returned some of the parts, he returned the cover, and he returned the 6 pesos. But the typewriter was still unusable. It seemed like Gonzales was either unable or unwilling to fix it the right way.
So even though he tried to fix things, he didn't really fulfill his original obligation. So a year passes and the typewriter is still broken. I bet Chaves was feeling like he had no other options.
You're right. After a year of waiting and dealing with this frustration, Chaves decided that he was going to take this to court. He felt that Gonzales had broken their agreement and he was ready to take legal action.
So he was taking things to the next level, moving from trying to resolve it informally to making a formal legal complaint. So what exactly did he want from Gonzales in this lawsuit?
Chaves' lawsuit had a few different parts. First, he wanted 90 pesos for what he called actual damages. And this was basically the cost of replacing the typewriter completely. Then he asked for another 100 pesos for tempered damages. And this was for the things that are hard to measure with money. Things like the inconvenience and the hassle he had to go through.
Okay, so that makes sense. He was out the cost of a brand new typewriter, and he wanted to be paid for the trouble he went through. But it sounds like he didn't stop there, right?
No, he didn't. Chaves also asked for 500 pesos for what are called moral damages. Moral damages are interesting. They're meant to pay for emotional distress, mental anguish caused by the whole situation.
Oh, so he was saying, this whole thing has caused me a lot of stress and anxiety, and I deserve to be paid for that. Is that a normal thing to ask for in a case like this?
It's not uncommon in the Philippines legal system to ask for moral damages. They are often given in breach of contract cases, especially when the breach caused someone a lot of emotional distress or damaged their reputation.
Interesting. So he's covered the cost of the typewriter, the hassle, and the emotional toll. It sounds like he asked for everything. Is that all he wanted?
He had one final demand. He wanted 500 pesos for what are called attorney's fees. After all, going to court costs money.
Right, of course. He's basically saying, you caused this problem, so you should pay for the legal costs I had to deal with to fight for my rights. So Chaves made his demands. What did the court say about all of this?
Well, the court agreed with Chaves. They said that Gonzales had, in fact, breached the contract. They pointed to Article 1167 of the Philippine Civil Code, which says that if someone doesn't fulfill their obligation, they should have to pay for it to be done.
Okay, so the court agreed that Gonzales messed up. They're using the law to hold him accountable for not fixing the typewriter the right way.
Exactly. Article 1167 is a really important part of this. Think of it this way. If you hire someone to build a fence and they only build half of it, this article is there to protect you. It makes sure that the person you hired is responsible for finishing the job or paying you for the work they didn't do.
So it's not just about typewriters. This legal principle applies to all kinds of contracts and agreements. It's about making sure that people do what they promise to do. So the court agreed with Chaves, but what did that mean for the money? Did he get everything he asked for?
Well, that's where things get a little more complicated. The court awarded Chaves a total of 31.10 pesos.
Wait, 31.10 pesos? That's a lot less than the thousands he was asking for.
You're right. This initial award was just for the cost of the missing parts.
I bet Chaves felt like he was winning the battle but losing the war. The court seemed to agree that Gonzales messed up, but they didn't seem to understand how much Chaves had actually suffered.
That's a good way to put it. Chaves felt this wasn't fair.
Yeah.
So he decided to appeal the court's decision.
So he wasn't giving up. He was going to keep fighting for what he thought he deserved. What did Gonzales say about this appeal? Did he just accept the court's decision?
Not exactly. Gonzales came back with his own argument. He said that because they never set a specific date for when the repair should be done, Chaves should have first asked the court to set a deadline before saying that Gonzales breached the contract.
So he was trying to put the blame back on Chaves, saying that he didn't follow the right legal steps. It sounds like things were about to get even more interesting.
You're right. With Chaves appealing and Gonzales defending himself, it was time for the Supreme Court to step in and make a final decision.
Okay, so we've got a broken typewriter, a frustrated customer, a repairman who seemed to have gotten in over his head, and a legal fight that's going all the way to the highest court in the country. This is getting good.
It is. And in part 2, we'll look at the Supreme Court's decision. We'll talk about the legal principles they used and what it all means for this interesting case.
Sounds good. See you there.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Chaves versus Gonzales. Last time we left off with Chaves appealing the court's decision. He felt that 31 pesos just wasn't enough to cover all the inconvenience and trouble he'd gone through. And then Gonzales came back with his own argument. He claimed that Chaves should have set a deadline before complaining about the contract being broken.
Yeah, the case really comes down to whether a specific deadline was needed. It makes you think about how much detail we really need to put in an agreement. A lot of times we just assume things are understood. But like we see in this case, that can cause problems. Exactly. It shows why it's so important to communicate clearly and document things. A simple written agreement that says what the work is and how long it should take could have prevented a lot of headaches for both Chaves and Gonzales. So what did the Supreme Court do about all of this? Did they agree with Gonzales that there needed to be a deadline?
They didn't. The Supreme Court actually sided with Chaves. They said that Gonzales had definitely failed to do what he was supposed to say. Remember, he returned the typewriter in pieces. That alone was enough to break the contract, whether there was a deadline or not.
So the Supreme Court was saying that no matter how much time was allowed, it was totally unreasonable for Gonzales to take months, even after being paid for parts, and then return the typewriter completely broken.
Exactly. The court said that a reasonable amount of time for the repair had definitely passed, and Gonzales never even asked for more time. By returning the typewriter in pieces, he basically admitted that he couldn't do the repair he promised.
I see. So even though a specific deadline wasn't written down, it was clear from the situation that Gonzales had taken way too long and hadn't done what he was supposed to do. What's interesting to me is that the first court only focused on the missing parts when they decided how much money to award. But Chaves was asking for more than just the cost of those parts, right? He wanted to be paid for the emotional stress, the inconvenience, all those things that are hard to put a price on.
You're right. And the Supreme Court did consider that. They looked more closely at Article 1167, which Chaves had mentioned in his appeal, and they explained what it really meant. They said that this article means Gonzales has to pay not only for the missing parts, but also for the cost of doing the whole repair properly.
Oh, so they're looking at Article 1167 in a broader way. They're saying it's not just about the physical stuff in the agreement, it's about making sure the job gets done right. It's like hiring someone to remodel your kitchen. They can't just say, oops, I forgot the countertops, and call it a day. They have to finish the whole project like they agreed.
Exactly. The court is saying that a contract isn't just about providing the materials. It's about doing what you promised to do. And to really drive that point home, the Supreme Court also brought up Article 1170, which says that if you receive something, you have to return it in the same condition. This made their decision against Gonzales even stronger, because he clearly didn't return the typewriter in the same working condition he got it in.
So now there are two articles from the Civil Code that are working against Gonzales. They both say that he was responsible for finishing the repair and making sure the typewriter was returned in good condition. This legal framework shows how important responsibilities are, even in simple contracts. But wait, if the Supreme Court agreed with Chaves on these points, wouldn't he get a lot more money than the original 31.10 pesos?
You would think so, right? And the Supreme Court did increase the amount to 89.85 pesos, which covered the full cost of the repair plus some interest. But here's where things get interesting again.
The twist. I'm listening. Did Gonzales find a way to get out of paying the full amount?
Not really. The Supreme Court did say Chaves was right about the cost of the repair. However, they didn't give him the money he asked for moral and temperate damages, and they also didn't give him the attorney's fees.
Wait, what? He went through all this emotional stress and legal costs, and he doesn't get paid for any of that. That seems kind of unfair, doesn't it? I thought the court was on his side.
It does seem that way at first, but the Supreme Court had reasons for denying those specific parts. You see, moral damages are meant to compensate for the emotional and mental stress caused by a broken contract. They're often awarded when the breach leads to public shame, severe anxiety, or damage to someone's reputation. And temperate damages are supposed to cover more concrete things that cause inconvenience, like having to take extra time off work because of the breach, even though it's hard to put an exact dollar amount on that lost time. The problem was that even though Chaves had included these things in his lawsuit, the Supreme Court said that he hadn't really explained what his emotional distress was or how much inconvenience he had suffered in his initial complaint.
So even though he might have had good reasons for asking for those types of damages, he didn't explain them well enough in his first filing. It's like forgetting to include some important ingredients in a recipe, the dish just won't turn out right.
That's a great analogy, and it shows how important it is to be precise and clear in legal matters. You can't just assume the court will understand what you're saying.
No.
You need to explain things in detail and give specific examples to support your arguments.
That's really helpful advice for anyone who's dealing with legal stuff. Even something that seems as simple as a broken typewriter repair. What about the attorney's fees? Why didn't he get those either?
The reason for denying the attorney's fees was similar. Chaves asked for them in his lawsuit, but he didn't explain why he should get them based on the law. The court said that he didn't give enough justification or connect his request to the legal rules that would allow them to grant it.
Wow, so even though Chaves won the main part, getting paid for the repair, he lost out on other damages because of technicalities in his original complaint. It shows how important it is to have a good lawyer who can help you with these complicated things and make sure your arguments are presented correctly.
Absolutely. And I think everyone can learn something from that. Whether you're dealing with a contract disagreement, a problem with your property, or any other legal issue, having a lawyer who understands the law and how things work in court can make a big difference in whether you win or lose.
This case is a lot more complicated and interesting than I thought it would be. It's not just about a broken typewriter. It's a look into how contract law works, how legal processes work, and how even small details can be important.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. Chaves versus Gonzales is not just a story from the past. It's a case study that shows how important it is to have clear agreements, to know your legal rights, and to get help from a professional when dealing with the legal system.
Well said. So we've looked at what the Supreme Court decided. We've talked about Articles 1167 and 1170, and we've learned about the details of damages and legal procedure. Where do we go from here? What are your final thoughts on this interesting case?
Let's wrap up this deep dive in part 3. We'll discuss the key lessons we've learned from Chaves versus Gonzales. And we'll explore a thought-provoking question, a what-if scenario, that will challenge our understanding of contract law and how it works in real life.
Sounds great. Let's get to the final part. All right, welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into Chaves versus Gonzales. This case has been quite the journey. We started with a broken typewriter and ended up exploring the highest court in the Philippines.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how a simple repair job turned into all these discussions about contract law, legal procedures, and how important it is to be clear when you're making agreements.
Absolutely. So as we wrap things up here, let's think about what our listeners can take away from Chaves versus Gonzales. What are the big lessons here? What should people be thinking about after they hear this story?
That's a good question. I think the biggest takeaway is that contract law isn't just for big companies and lawyers. It's for everyone. It doesn't matter if it's a repair job, a freelance project, or even borrowing something from your neighbor. Knowing your rights and what you're responsible for in those situations is really important.
Right. It's easy to forget about the legal side of things when you're just doing everyday stuff. But as this case shows us, even small details can become big problems.
Exactly. This case also shows us how important it is to communicate clearly. And if you can, put things in writing. If Chaves and Gonzales had a simple agreement, even just an email or text, that said when the repair would be done and what it included, they might have avoided this whole legal battle.
Yeah, a written agreement doesn't have to be a complicated legal document. Just something that outlines the important terms can really help prevent misunderstandings and arguments later on.
Right? It's like a record of what everyone agreed to, which could be really helpful if something goes wrong. Another important thing to remember is that even if you're not a lawyer, understanding your basic rights and what legal options are available to you can make you feel more confident.
It's like having a toolbox, right? You might not use every tool in the box every day, but knowing what you have and how to use the tools can help you deal with problems when they come up.
Exactly. Chaves was able to win his case because he understood that Article 1167 could help him get the full cost of the repair. Knowing which legal tools apply to your situation can make a huge difference.
And this case is also a good reminder that legal procedures and paying attention to details are really important. Chaves might have been able to get more money for his emotional distress and inconvenience, but he missed out because he didn't explain those things clearly enough in his original complaint.
Yeah, it shows that being careful and specific can be just as important as having good legal arguments. That's where a good lawyer can really help.
That's right. A good lawyer can not only explain the law to you, but they can also make sure that your side of the story is presented in a clear and convincing way. So before we finish up today, I wanted to ask you about something interesting that came up in Chaves versus Gonzales.
Sure, what's that?
What if, right from the start, Chaves and Gonzales had agreed on a specific date for when the typewriter would be fixed? Like, what if they had written down, the typewriter will be repaired and returned in 2 weeks? Would that have changed how the case turned out?
Hmm. That's a really interesting question. It makes you think about how the court might have viewed the situation differently if there had been a clear deadline that both sides agreed to.
Yeah. Would they have thought Gonzales's delay was less of a problem because there wasn't a deadline? Or would the fact that he returned the typewriter in pieces still be the main reason he lost?
It's a tough question. This whole deep dive hasn't just given us facts about a case. It's also made us think about the complexities of contract law and how it works in real-life situations.
I agree. And that's what makes exploring legal cases like this so interesting. They challenge us to think critically, see things from different sides, and really appreciate how important the legal system is in our everyday lives.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Chaves versus Gonzales. I hope everyone enjoyed this journey into the world of contract law and learned something new along the way.
Me too. Thanks for listening, everyone, and until next time, keep being curious, keep asking questions, and keep exploring the amazing world we live in.